Another Pokemon we rarely get to talk about is Kingler, just because within the TCG it doesn't have a whole lot of presence. But Kingler is one of my absolute favorite cards to come out of the Japanese exclusive Vending series. Probably because its attacks are so big and ridiculous, but in a good way, not like base set Charizard where it's a complete waste. Kingler's first attack, Salt Water, is very good, even though it does rely on a coin flip, but that's okay because we're not even really gonna need it to power this thing up. No, we are here for Double-Edged Claw, which is gonna be dealing 80 damage, which is pretty massive for this format. You're guaranteed a lot of one-hit KOs off of 80 damage, the downside being that during your opponent's next turn, any attack they hit Kingler with is going to be doubled in power, which is very circumstantial. Sometimes it's going to hit you hard, sometimes it won't, especially if you can hit your opponent fast enough to where you're knocking their Pokemon out before they can really power up any attacks. Even then, just trading Oko for Oko can make for a really fun game. It's really just you and your opponent duking it out turn after turn. And this deck is really going to run a lot like a watery version of base set Arcanine. You'll see what I mean when we get into it, so let's just jump right on in. As you probably already know or have guessed, this is a Rain Dance variant, so we're going to be beginning with a full playset of base set Squirtle. Since we are playing with the Vending series here, there's also a Vending Squirtle that you could substitute in if you really wanted to, but for me, there's nothing too special about the Vending Squirtle that sets it apart from this one, so I just went ahead and went with what I had on hand. And this is a Turbo Blastoise build, so no Wartortle in this deck. We're going to be relying on Pokemon Breeder, so full play set of Squirtle and then 3 copies of base set Blastoise. Your typical Turbo Blastoise build relies solely on Hydro Pump, but Hydro Pump caps out at 60, which is gonna be a near miss KO for a lot of Pokemon, especially a lot of bulky normal types like Kangaskhan. Kangaskhan's in here purely for fetch so that you can fill your hand with as many cards as you possibly can, get a ton of water energy in there. That way, as soon as Kingler hits the field, Blastoise is hitting the field as well, and then you can get down 4 water energy onto Kingler. So 2 copies of Kangaskhan, which is also going to help you avoid a bunch of mulligans, as Kangaskhan's not a bad start to the game as long as you've got a switch or another way to get it onto your bench, so that when you want to start attacking with a Kingler on turn 2 or turn 3, you can. Fossil Krabby also has a pretty useful first attack and call for family so that you can fill your bench with more Krabby and potentially set up more Kingler for that Rain Dance downpour of water energy. So full playset of Fossil Krabby and a full playset of Vending Kingler. Because this is a Turbo Rain Dance, the name of the game is basically draw a bunch of cards as quickly as possible, get your hand full of not only the Pokemon and the evolution cards you need, but also those water energy so that you can Rain Dance them down. So we're going to be using 3 copies of Professor Oak. Unlike most other decks, in this one you're probably going to be using more than 1 Oak just to refresh your hand. On the side of that, we're also going to be running 2 copies of Misty's Tears just to boost the number of water energy that you're actually getting into your hand. Because with Rain Dance, water energy in your hand basically means water energy on your Kingler. Because it is so imperative to actually get Blastoise down on the field turn 2, we're running a full playset of Pokemon Breeder. This is going to allow you to fully power up Kingler and start hitting for 80 damage before your opponent can really hit you back with anything that can take full advantage of that doubled attack power that they're getting. But to help with some of those early game threats, we're also going to throw in Defender because, you know, that double attack power that you're giving your opponent on their next turn, even if they're hitting you for 20 damage off of a Hitmonchan, taking 40 damage that early game off of an 80 HP Pokemon isn't great, but you want to reduce that damage you're taking as much as possible so that you're set up for multiple turns of dealing that consistent 80 damage. That's why there's a full playset of Defender in here. It's pretty obvious. But also, you want to be able to move your Pokemon around. You don't want to get stuck with that Kangaskhan in the active position, which is why there's a couple of copies of Warp Point and also a couple copies of Switch. Kind of the same thing with a Blastoise, which isn't as bad because you can still rely on that Hydro Pump to deal 60 damage, but that's not going to get you any Okos. That's the entire point of having Kingler in this deck, is it's going to knock out the majority of Pokemon you're going to run into in this format with 1 hit. a couple copies of Item Finder to help recycle some of these cards, and then a full play set of Super Energy Removal. Because it is a rain dance, you've got a ton of energy flying around. You've got the extra to discard to slow your opponent down a lot. It's going to make it a lot harder for them to hit you with big attacks and knock out your Kingler when they don't have the energy for it. And then we are going to ignore that I put this card down because it is out of format. That's a leftover from when I was actually playing a base Neo version of this deck. But the base gym version works a lot better, so that's what we're going to stick with. So take that Super Energy Retrieval and replace it with any other card you want. Probably a Misty's Tears would be really helpful, or another Switch. But we got a couple copies of Nightly Garbage Run to help recycle some Pokemon and potentially some Water Energy as well, even though not as much. Because the rest of the deck is going to be filled with Water Energy. That way you make sure you always have enough in your hand to drop those Water Energy down onto your Kingler and start smacking your opponent with that big meaty claw. The trainer base is a little bit more limited in this build than in most other decks for the format, just because we need so much more room for Water Energy. If you really want to squeeze in some more trainers, there's definitely a lot of good options that we'll get to here in a minute, but you can take out those two Kangaskhan. It's just with only 8 basics in the deck, you are at risk for a bunch of mulligans, and Kangaskhan's a pretty good support card, but other than that, this is the list. Probably the biggest threat to this deck is Lass, just because it is so reliant on getting the right trainers at the right time. So if you've got the Pokemon Breeder and the Blastoise in hand going into your turn 2, but before that you get hit with a Lass, that hurts because this deck doesn't have a whole lot of options for quickly retrieving that card, which is another reason it is so important to play through all the trainers in this deck as quickly as possible, because the main point of this deck is really just get energy and Pokemon on the field. It's not a very trainer heavy deck, but it relies so heavily on those few trainers the first 2 to 3 turns that you really gotta watch out for last and get those cards out of your hand as soon as possible. If you are going to be making trainer additions, Computer Search is the first obvious one because it is so important to get those key cards early game. You want to be able to get the Pokemon Breeder, the Blastoise, the Kingler, maybe even a Misty's Tears into your hand on turn 2. That way you're just evolving up, you're rain dancing down the energies, and your strategy is pretty much done. It's solid for the rest of the game. So of course a couple copies of Computer Search aren't going to hurt. Usually I could just get whatever I needed with Professor Oak after making some hand sacrifices, but Computer Search is still another really great option. And if you're anticipating going up against decks where not every attack is going to be a for sure OHKO, I'm talking about Lickitungs, Chanseys, Kangaskhan's, even Blastoise on the opposing side of the field. Anything that's not going to be an OHKO, you want to probably include a couple copies of Gust that my build does not. That way you can pull out Pokemon from the bench, get those easy kills before your opponent's able to set them up. Because there will be energy to spare, another pretty decent option is Super Potion. That way if you are getting chipped with a lot of smaller attacks, but you still want to keep attacking with the same Kingler, deprive your opponent of prizes for another turn, then Super Potion is an option. You can heal the damage off of those Kinglers so it can live to double-edged claw another day. And that's going to be it for this build. Let me know what you think about it down in the comments. Also, let me know if there are any Vending series cards you think could make some viable decks, or at least some really fun decks out of. That way I can start playtesting. I've had a lot of fun using these previously unused cards in my experience. As always, thanks for watching and commenting and liking and anything else you do to support the channel. I'll see you next video. Bye.